This is the story of an entertainment company I am certain you've all heard of before, but are probably underestimating nevertheless. As I do the research for these various cartoon reviews, one name keeps popping up again and again in the strangest of places. So I figured before I got into how it connects to Antron Fleece and lethal vegetable matter next time, I'd stop and show how four of the largest children's franchises I know of are connected by one name.
G.I. Joe toys have been around since 1964, when Hasbro realized they could sell dolls to boys if they just called them action figures.
As stupid as that sounds, it turns out young boys really are that simple.
The Joes were really just cheap 12-inch plastic dolls in doll clothing, but they proved very popular. Now, the original line just had generic stand-ins for each of the branches of the American military, but over time, characters with actual defining traits and characteristics were added. Nevertheless, G.I. Joe remains something very different from what we now know it as. The man responsible for that change, strangely enough, was George Lucas. In 1982, Hasbro saw the popularity of the Kenner Star Wars 3 3/4 inch action figures and decided to relaunch the G.I. Joe line in the same size, but with significantly greater articulation. Not wanting to leave things to chance, they developed brand new ways of advertising their toys, including creating tie-in comics and cartoons. That's right, you'd think it would have happened earlier, but G.I. Joe was perhaps the first show created entirely to sell toys. But it's the comic that actually matters to this story. Hasbro contracted Marvel to write and publish the comics. Indeed, they even went so far as to tap the creative talents of Marvel for costume and character design, so that the various figures would have simple but unique traits and personalities. It is largely because of them that G.I. Joe became so popular and cemented its place in cartoon history. Well, that's what happened in America anyways. But the Joe toys weren't just popular there. A toy company called Takara licensed the rights to use the original molds to create a straight Japanese port called Combat Joe. When that proved successful, they adapted the idea into a new line called Henshin Cyborg that used the same molds but had clear plastic skin so kids could see the cybernetic parts inside. These proved popular, but too expensive to make. So in 1974, Takara spun off yet another series called Microman. This time, they were marketed as actual-sized cyborgs, which could hide by disguising themselves as children's toys, such as toy planes, toy guns, and tape decks. And in 1980, they spun off one last line, called Diaclone, which featured Microman-style toys piloting larger vehicles that could shift into robot mode Macross style. Well, in 1983, some representatives from Hasbro saw Microman and Diaclone toys at a Japanese toy expo, and they snapped up the rights to them.
Not wanting to try to market two similar toy lines at the same time, they instead merged the two of them into a single franchise they called Transformers.
That's right, Transformers is the direct descendant of the original G.I. Joe line, and in 1984 it finally returned home, murdered its father, and married its mother.
Oedipus Prime, maximize!
Now, I'm not actually certain if Hasbro knew where Microman and Diaclone came from, although I am guessing they did the research. Whatever the case, they decided to give Transformers the full Joe treatment, including a cartoon and a comic book tie-in.
And once again, they tapped Marvel to help them with the character design and storyline. Marvel did, and thus the saga of the Autobots and Decepticons was born. Now, you might guess that this was the first time Marvel was involved in a Japanese product. But you'd be wrong. In 1978, it worked with Toei to produce a live-action Japanese Spider-Man series, where Spider-Man fought evil with the aid of a giant robot and a mariachi player. I swear I am not making that up. I suppose the mariachi player might have been a one-time thing. The robot, however, was not, and proved to be so popular that Toei decided to expand on the concept. With the help of Marvel, they created another show called Battle Fever J about an international super team led by Captain Japan, who was clearly a Japanese version of Captain America. Battle Fever J is considered to be the first of the Super Sentai series, a line of shows that is still going strong 34 years later, and is popular enough that many of you already know where I'm going with this. For those of you who don't, in 1992, the 14th Super Sentai series, Zio Ranger, premiered in Japan. It looked like this. Recognize it? That's right.
Though Marvel parted ways with Toei after Battle Fever J, it had a direct hand in the creation of the series that would one day give rise to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So that's G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Power Rangers all connected through Marvel. Now, I could end right here. It would be a good stopping point. But I did say 4 children's franchises, and I have one more permutation, this one allowing me to hop back over the Pacific and across the Atlantic as well.
The most celebrated line of Marvel Transformers comics was the one created by Marvel UK, and one of the characters they created for it was the unfortunately named Death's Head, a non-transforming robotic bounty hunter. And I gotta admit, he's a pretty fun character. Marvel liked him well enough that they wanted to use him for their own products.
There were just 2 small problems with this.
The first, any character whose first debut was in a Transformers or G.I. Joe comic was the property of Hasbro. Fortunately for Marvel, they already knew when they created the character that they liked him enough to keep around, so they exploited an archaic loophole known as showing the character in a Marvel-owned comic first. The second and larger problem, though, was that Death's Head was the size of a Transformer. Thus, his first appearance after leaving the Transformers storyline was in Doctor Who magazine number 135, in which the Doctor shrunk him down to human size using one of the Master's tissue compression eliminators. And while I'll be the first to admit that's not the same thing as Marvel being there at the creation of Doctor Who, it still manages to link G.I. Joe, Transformers, Power Rangers, and Doctor Who via one company, Marvel.
Believe me when I tell you, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Marvel is involved in everything. Its name pops up everywhere, as we will be seeing next time when we explore how a throwaway spoof movie from the 70s ended up becoming a Saturday morning cartoon show. And yes, Marvel had at least a small hand in it. I'll see you then.